Check 365 Radio, 365 Sports. One note about Baylor. Xavier Howard, Miami beat Baltimore last night. Kind of a surprise. Xavier Howard, 49-yard fumble return for a touchdown as they stunned the Ravens and also Lamar Jackson. We're now joined by Jason King, college basketball analyst, writer, columnist, understands the sport. He's a go-to guy for us, no question, as Baylor opens up against Incarnate Word, and we've mentioned it 1,000 times today, that they lower the banner for a national championship. Jason, you have covered a lot of teams. You've seen a lot of national championship teams. We know about last year. What do you think that moment will be like tonight at the Farrell Center?
Oh man, I think it'll send goosebumps throughout the crowd. It'll be exhilarating. I just hope that there's a decent crowd there to witness it, or a good one. I don't know if they were able to get some of the guys back or not that had moved on. It's probably pretty difficult to do at this point in the year, but yeah, I just part of me just to be blunt, part of me kind of wishes they'd have waited till it was like maybe a Saturday afternoon game against the top 25 opponent, a game when you knew things were going to be, sold out or whatever, or close to it. But I also understand the need to get that banner in there, let every team that comes in, let every fan that walks through there see it as, from the beginning of the season moving forward. So I don't know. It's just been a special, magical run. Last year's team, even the team before that, we, as people that follow Baylor athletics, we've been pretty spoiled watching, the Jared Butlers and the Davion Mitchells and the Freddie Gillespies of the world. So hopefully tonight they'll start a new chapter that'll give us a lot more good things to cover.
Jason, do you think that this team is ready to contend again right away for a national title, or is it one that needs to build? The one I think maybe people forget, the one that was last year's team was built over 3 years. Right. I think there's enough pieces back and not just pieces, but key pieces from last year's team that I don't think it's out of the question at all that they could contend for a national title. Just think of all the teams that we've seen, make the Final Four over the years, whether it's a VCU or a Butler, George Mason, or someone like that. You didn't expect it. Baylor's going to enter the season as a top 10 team, and if they go into that tournament at the end of the year with a lot of momentum, I definitely think they could make the Final Four and contend for it. I think people are sleeping on them. To be real honest, I think that even though they are, I think, ranked 8th going into the season, I still feel like more people are talking about Kansas, more people are talking about Texas and the Big 12, and they don't realize how good of a player Adam Flagler is, and they're not giving Matthew Myers his credit. They don't know about L.J. Cryer's background, and everyone wants to talk about Remy Martin at Kansas, the big transfer from the Pac-12. How come James Akinjo is not getting mentioned? He was a first-team All-League player. How can people not expect Jonathan Chamachacho to make huge strides during the offseason? I know he did, and I think we'll see it, starting tonight. So I think this is a team, full of great pieces and probably really good chemistry right off the bat. And, it may take a while, for them to really gel and to where we see them playing at a, real crisp, clean level like we were used to. But I think it's all there to do a lot of damage without question.
Jason, what's your best guess? I know there's some givens, like a Matthew Meyer, but what's your best guess on the starting lineup and kind of how that works out tonight?
Ooh, God, I wasn't prepared for that. But it's tough. Because there's so many things you could do.
Yeah.
When we saw Scott Drew the other day, when we were in studio interviewing him, I don't think he even knew at that point. I know that Flagler's been a little banged up with a hand injury, so I don't know where he is at this point. But let's say he's healthy. I'm definitely thinking, Flagler and Akinjo and Meyer and probably Kendall Brown and John, or Flo. It depends on if you're going to go with two bigs or even though John's not a traditional big, but those would be the guys. And but you got L.J. Cryer right there knocking on the door to get in the lineup, along with several others. So that's kind of how I'd look at it off the bat. So
of the three highly rated, we know Langston Love's out. Unfortunately, he's out for the year. But with Sohan playing in Europe, and he had played in the United States at a high level, and of course Kendall Brown is supposed to be just freakish. They've really done most of their damage in recent years without that new incoming star out of high school. Mm-hmm. They went away from that, and they admitted to that. They found fits. But how good is Kendall Brown?
Man, I tell you what, you can always kind of tell when a coach is BSing you, and when he's when his excitement's legitimate. And I felt like talking to Scott Drew the other day about Kendall Brown. I mean, I think he's one of those rare freshmen that's going to be ready to compete and play huge minutes and make a huge impact right off the bat. And, maybe you don't see it all the time on the scoreboard, but just the way, he's involved in so many, impacts the game in so many areas, whether it's defense, passing, bringing the ball up the court, rebound and scoring. And I mean, I think he's going to do so much for this team. And I think they need to just make him a focal point from the get go. And if you have to play through some growing pains with him, that's fine. But this is, the most highly touted recruit they've had at Baylor since 2011. And, hopefully we'll get a good dose of that tonight. And, so he's the guy I'm looking forward to seeing the most, but, you mentioned the newcomers. They're all so different. I mean, with Sohan, that's a guy that on paper you think, well, maybe he's the guy that doesn't play a ton this year. Maybe he's the 8th or 9th man, but, talking to people around the program, I think, like you said, the fact that he's, has been groomed overseas for such a long time and is probably a little bit further along than most freshmen when it comes to just the X's and O's and understanding the game and being a good teammate and sharing the ball. And plus his skill level is so high especially for his size. I mean, I think he's going to be, one of the probably the best 4 or 5 players on this team, probably by midseason, if not earlier. So I think he's going to make a big impact. And, obviously Akinjo, should be a starter and one of the best guards in the league, I would think, from day one.
Do you think that, that like maybe Jordan Turner or Dane Danger might have an impact on this team this year?
Entering the season, I think those guys are probably back a little bit, maybe in the 8, 9, 10 role, but that's not to say that they couldn't surface and do some things. Turner's been around for 2 years now. He's, the culture that guys like Butler and Mitchell and Vital and Teague helped instill. Hopefully that's rubbed off on him. And a lot of times when some of these new guys might be going through growing pains or trying to adjust or whatever, it's guys like Turner, program guys that, have been around that are there to kind of help pick up the slack for a while. So maybe we'll see him contribute early. I'm not sure. And Danger, that's kind of a big question mark. He's one of the players I just can't wait to see, just because of his size and his aggression. And he's just it seems like he'd be such a load to handle in the paint. And that's something other than, maybe John, that's something that this team doesn't really have. And I think he's a guy that they could really use if he's ready. And the good thing is I think they have enough depth and enough pieces to where they're not going to have to play him until he is ready. So hopefully we'll see it soon.
Jason, obviously defense has been, the bread and butter for this program here as of late, and you lose, big time players like Davion Mitchell and obviously Mark Vital as well. What are your thoughts on the defense and having to replace some guys, but also obviously feeling good about what you have on campus?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing with Baylor, and I'm glad you brought that up, it's so many of the little intangibles that were lost with Butler and Mitchell and Vital and Teague that to me are the biggest question mark, is like, how do you replace that? It's not even so much numbers. When you look at scoring stats and stuff or steals, it's just more like the presence they created out there and the culture they helped create and the way they, their energy and their swagger, rubbed off on everyone. They carried themselves like, they were the best players in the country, and they were, but they, I think by the end of their careers, evoked fear in opponents because they were, even though they got us, you saw them against Gonzaga, they were cocky in a good way, and maybe that's not the wrong word, but had that air about them, and I think, and so now it's like, okay, who on this team is going to set that tone, and who's going to, rub off on everyone like they rubbed off on everyone, and I think it's that presence and that aura and that just confidence that I think this team is going to have to get, and maybe they'll have it, from the get go, and maybe it'll take a while to develop. But it's those little, and you mentioned defense. That's where you really saw it the most with those departed guys. And so, to me, that's what is going to be interesting: is how quickly does this team find that, and where does it come from?
Jason, with the Big 12, they're picked third because Texas has a bunch of key transfers. Kansas has, you mentioned Remy Martin earlier, and Bill Self, kind of his, maybe if you watching the game against Michigan State, it looks like he's got his team again for the first time in a couple of years. What do you think about the Big 12 and Kansas and Texas ahead of Baylor right now in their prospects?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call between those three. I always like guys that have experience and that have done it before. And that's why I would probably put Baylor, ahead of those guys. I mean, so many people focus on what Baylor lost; they're forgetting about what they're bringing back. But I will say I was pretty impressed with Kansas Tuesday night as far as how good they looked at this early. I was expecting them to be a little more disjointed, but they looked really really good, and they're going to be really deep. I know he loves what he's got up there, and Texas. I mean, they obviously have all the pieces, but I don't think people realize how difficult it is to bring guys in from all these different schools, and in a matter of 3 or 4 months, have them go out on the court and be a cohesive unit with everyone on the same page, and no one trying to get theirs and get their own shots and play hero ball. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done. I mean, Chris Beard's been bringing in transfers to Texas Tech in the last 2 years. They were guys we talked about all off season. In the last 2 years, I think they finished 6th in the league and barely squeaked into the tournament. So the guys he has at Texas are a little more high profile, and that's good, but it could also be bad. So it'll be really interesting to see how quickly they develop. But if they can put all those puzzle pieces together, I mean, it's going to be a pretty special thing at Texas. But with this team, but I still would lean toward Baylor. Finishing probably first. I would be disappointed if Baylor finished anywhere below second in the league.
What were your thoughts on Mike Boynton and his response to the NCAA? And the NCAA obviously had a follow-up after, Oklahoma State fans, I guess, got a little wild. But what were your thoughts on that punishment handed down to Oklahoma State basketball?
I think it's ridiculous and sad and a bad look to the NCAA. And, I think all of us that have been around Mike Boynton in the small bit that we have been around him, we really like him and like his, makeup and demeanor and swagger and his, fearlessness when it comes to speaking out. So I was glad that he went after them and said those things. I mean, those penalties that occurred at Oklahoma State occurred when these guys were barely even in high school. And the fact that those players are having to pay the price for it is ridiculous. And the NCAA for one thing, has been so slow to investigate all of these cases and to reach a conclusion. I can't believe Kansas still hadn't received word on its punishment. So I just think that the penalty or the punishment doesn't really fit the crime at Oklahoma State. I think it's way too harsh. I know the NCAA is trying to make an example out of people, but I just don't think it's fair to those guys. And I'm glad he said what he said.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Look forward to having you on over the next several months, and part of the big one, too, with Paul when it comes to our college basketball coverage, like JD does with Paul during football season. All right, do we have time here for the I
think JD's going to be with us. We just need to guard against the wedding.
Yeah, we got to do that. Grayson having kids, JD getting married. Do we have